It is Thursday, January the 20th, 2022. I am Pearson Bowen with a special edition of the CBC Morning Report. As they say, lightning struck twice in Barbados in one spot when the Barbados Labour Party once again secured a clean sweep of the polls in the general elections. The decision to call a snap election by party leader Mia Amor Mottley has paid off, with the BLP retaining all 30 seats for the second time in 3.5 years. Speaking at the BLP headquarters on Roebuck Street earlier today, before a crowd of elated supporters, Ms. Mottley announced plans for her new cabinet.
The Honorable Dale Marshall, who has served this nation with distinction and who, in spite of all of the challenges we face, from debt to pandemic, who has never once said to me, Mia, I am too tired, Prime Minister, I can't do it, but who has remained available at the service of this nation 24/7, shall be the new Attorney General of Barbados in this republic. In accordance with the Constitution of Barbados, therefore, the Parliamentary Party of Barbados, of the Barbados Labour Party, met and have asked me to serve yet again as their leader, and I have humbly accepted. In a few hours, we anticipate that we will go, therefore, to the State House, accompanied by the General Secretary of this great party, the Honorable Jerome Walcott, the person who I propose to appoint as the leader of government business in the House of Assembly, my sister Santia Bradshaw. And you will forgive me for the emotion of this next one, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union, who for the first time in 65 years is on the platform of a Barbados Labour Party general election victory. It has been a long and grueling campaign, not from the point of view of time, but from the point of view of the day after Boxing Day to now. I therefore propose that I will address the nation on Monday evening with respect to who shall constitute the Cabinet of Barbados. And I do so conscious that these good men and women, and I dare say myself, deserve a little rest so that I do not continue to announce matters in a raspy voice.
We've only just begun, and so the CBC Morning Report will continue with even more from yesterday's general elections after this break. President of the Democratic Labour Party, Verla de Pisa, is this morning congratulating the Barbados Labour Party for its success at yesterday's polls and for recapturing all 30 seats in Parliament. Mr. Pisa says despite the result, she was proud of her team and what they were able to accomplish in such a short space of time. Speaking at the DLP's headquarters early this morning, Mr. Pisa stressed the continued low voter turnout at the polls remained a cause for concern. She added they intended to meet at a later date to decide the next steps for the party.
Our only concern is that the voter turnout continues to be depressed, and I do believe that we have to take a serious look at that going forward as to how we reclaim the confidence of our people in the process of democracy. Outside of that, as far as our team is concerned, we will regroup, we will decide not tonight, but sometime in the future what it is that we are doing, and we will communicate with you in relation to that. But congratulations to the Barbados Labour Party for the victory.
Well, there is a view that the Democratic Labour Party failed in its choice of candidates to the respective constituencies for the elections. This from political strategist and consultant Hartley Henry. He made the comment on last night's Barbados Decides elections broadcast.
The party really is at a stage where it really needs to stop and take stock. I mean, you have St. John that was led by two former prime ministers, persons of serious senior stature in Barbados and in the Democratic Labour Party. And you are telling me that you have a host of persons, including a former minister of government who was not as scarred as some of the others that were brought back, who was born in Gall Hill, St. John, who to my mind would have been the natural person to run in St. John as the candidate. I'm speaking about Mr. Stephen Lashley. And from the time I saw the nomination, I don't think you gave the people of St. John any choice.
Mr. Henry also commended the incumbent BLP candidate Charles Griffith, stressing his representation to the people was rewarded.
The incumbent, Mr. Griffith, worked hard. He has brought meaningful, visible, measurable, tangible development to St. John, and he has been appropriately rewarded. But I believe, at the same token, that the Democratic Labour Party exercised particularly poor judgment in sending someone like Worrell to St. John, when you had even the leader herself, the president.
Political scientist Dr. George Bell says the Democratic Labour Party will now have to look more closely at its reconstruction. He says this process will encompass looking for a genuine leader.
Also recognizing that development requires you to be able to analyze properly the future of your society. And on the basis of that, you build a fresh, energetic program and something that you can campaign politically upon. Now, when you don't do that, you end up like scraping the barrel and coming with things that have been exhausted probably for decades. I don't think also that you necessarily have to reject Errol Barrow. It is that you have to be able to interpret how to carry forward his ideas into the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, without a doubt, one of the tense campaign battles was for the seat of St. Michael's Southeast, where BLP elected candidate Santia Bradshaw says she expected to receive the support from people in the constituency.
I have my brother Rodney Grant as well, who's joined us. All of the blocks, all of the communities have come together in this election in a way that has been unprecedented. And I'm just grateful to my entire team, the management team, and the wider team for giving me the support that has been necessary to be able to bring home the seat for the Barbados Labour Party.
Ms. Bradshaw's opponent, Pedro Shepherd, who is also the Assistant General Secretary of the DLP, has been reflecting on his and the party's defeat at the polls.
certainly will continue to do my work in St. Michael Southeast, and I'm sure that most of the other candidates, who, particularly those who are in it for the first time, would want to do the same, because we all have a future. We all believe that we are here to serve, and despite this setback to some extent, I believe that we have all learned from the experience.
Well, in associated news, the police are also reporting that yesterday's general elections were more or less uneventful from their standpoint. Acting Inspector Rodney Innes says that there were long lines at a few polling stations early the morning. However, there were no reports of any disruptions.
Police officers reported no issues whatsoever. I spoke to the individual presiding officers, and they have indicated that everything is running smoothly security-wise. So we have a passing grade thus far.
And while the implementation of COVID-19 protocols could be blamed for lines at some polling stations, the acting inspector indicates there have been no reports of protocol breaches.
The presiding officers have indicated they recognize that they have instituted those protocols, and persons have been asked to follow them, and they could be seen as well. All the voters we see filing in, they had their mask on, and they had their social distances going on, and certainly the spraying of the alcohol and the different things like that has been ongoing. So everyone seems to be happy with the protocols. Everyone seems to be happy as they have a smooth transition into the voting center.
We'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll have some COVID-19 updates. The Best Dos Santos Public Health Laboratory identified 677 new COVID-19 cases. They include 300 males and 377 females from the 2,565 tests carried out on Tuesday. The new cases consist of 121 people under the age of 18. There were 103 people in isolation facilities, 5,561 in home isolation. The Public Health Laboratory has carried out 508,874 tests since February 2020 and recorded 37,063 COVID-19 cases. Under the vaccination program, the total number of people with at least one dose is 157,793. The total fully vaccinated, 146,257. As COVID-19 hospitalizations across the Bahamas continue to increase, the Minister of Health there, Dr. Michael Darville, says the surge is having an impact on the country's healthcare system.
Well, it's quite obviously Omicron is putting a serious strain on our healthcare systems, not only the hospitals, even at our clinics. This is a challenge, and this is a challenge every country is facing to keep healthcare services up and going, while at the same time providing essential services for those who have other medical conditions.
St. Lucia's healthcare system has been strengthened with the donation of a 40-bed mobile field hospital. It was donated by the U.S. Southern Command. We have a report now from HTS.
All hands were on deck as volunteers, representatives from the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, emergency first responders, and members of the Cadet Corps got to work setting up a 40-bed portable medical facility at the industrial estate in Vieux-Fort near the fire station.
It's a multi-sectorial program. We have people from all different sectors here assisting in that program, and we just today carrying out the training for that program with the help of Western Systems.
And what are the various agencies taking part in the operation?
We have NEMO, we have fire service, we have cadets, we have police. We have a number of agencies right now working with.
Engineer at the Ministry of Health, Monty Emmanuel, expects the training program and resources to help in fortifying the island's healthcare system in times of crisis.
We know we're in a pandemic. There's always a need for space for health, and then we always have natural disasters. We're very prone to that. So if a field hospital, we can mobilize anywhere that we need to, depends on what happens in the island.
Sentiments echoed by Southern Command's Lieutenant Colonel Shane Movan from the U.S. Military Liaison Office at the U.S. Embassy in Bridgetown, Barbados.
This is a 40-bed field hospital built so that it could be deployed to an austere location in response to natural disasters as well as COVID-19 medical relief as well.
So the hospital can be shifted from one place to the other?
Yes, the field hospital could be shifted from one place to the other.
The training is expected to equip participants with the expertise to adequately set up the facility in a couple of hours.
Well, staying in St. Lucia, the National Principals Association wants an immediate transition to remote learning as the country battles a continued spike in COVID-19 cases. The appeal to reverse the course to resume in-person learning comes 1 week after school children return to the classroom.
Learning institutions have confirmed that operations within the education sector are being run on skeletal staff as a result of the fifth wave.
We think by now, based on the data, based on the information that we have gathered, we should at least have the plan B of reverting to online instruction.
Principals are now concerned about student and teacher safety in the physical classes. An immediate transition to the work-from-home modality is now being recommended by the president of the National Principals Association, Valerie St. Helen Henry.
We would want it to be immediate because our schools are suffering.
The school administrator says the decision by the NPA comes after fervent monitoring of the first week of school and the impact that the fifth wave has had on students and teachers.
By the second day, we had a number of students who were reported to send them home, and continued during the course of the week. Schools were collecting data, passing it on to our supervisors, and we realized that not only the students but teachers were affected, where teachers were on given medical leave or had to go for COVID tests or on quarantine as a result of contact tracing.
Meanwhile, the St. Lucia Teachers Union, SLTU, says the concerns of educators as well as their recommendations were recently brought to the attention of Ministry of Education officials at a high-level meeting on Friday, January 14th.
This is an extended edition of the CBC Morning Report. We'll continue with more news after this break. The U.S. government will make 400 million surgical N95 masks available from its Surgical Strategic National Stockpile for free to the public starting next week. This as the Biden administration tries to curb the COVID-19 pandemic.
So health experts say they're the most protective against the Omicron variant. The Biden administration's faced criticism for shortages in high-grade masks as well as at-home testing kits. Let's go live to Mike Hanna, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. So tell us more about these steps the Biden administration is taking as it faces criticism of its COVID handling.
Well, last week, the CDC announced that it was preferable to wear K95 masks rather than cloth masks, which the majority of Americans who wear masks are indeed working. Now, the Biden administration has announced that it will be distributing some 400 million K95 masks to Americans for free. These will be distributed via pharmacies as well as community health centers. One White House official says this is the biggest distribution of personal protection equipment ever in U.S. history. So this is a significant move, and it follows the announcement that the testing program is up and running. The Biden administration has set an online testing program in which people can log online and order free home tests, which will be delivered within 7 to 12 days. Now, all of this follows intense criticism of the Biden administration, first of all, for its lack of foresight in terms of creating enough tests, its lack of foresight in terms of creating enough masks. Part of the issue in the past was a shortage of masks, that any massive distribution would impact on health workers and those most in need of masks who are in direct contact regularly with those infected with COVID. But now the administration says that there are enough masks in the National Strategic Stockpile. In addition, mask manufacturers say they are in a position to make millions more masks. But still, the criticism has been going on. This is the Biden administration's response. Its critics say this is late. However, better late than never, to use some cliche. But once again, there will be some millions of masks available to all Americans. This is an absolutely critical issue as Omicron variant continues to rage throughout the country.
South African-born biotech billionaire Patrick Soon-Shiong has opened a plant in Cape Town, South Africa, that will be the first on the southern continent to produce COVID-19 vaccines from start to finish. The NANSA facility aims to produce 1 billion doses annually by 2025. The plant is South Africa's third vaccine manufacturing facility, but it would make vaccines itself rather than producing them from semi-finished batches.
Less than 5 countries in Africa have a vaccination rate of at least 30%. This project will advance medical care and innovation not only in South Africa but across the continent, especially at a time when low-income countries have struggled with access to vaccines during the global pandemic. Now, the emphasis here is on making Africa self-reliant, and research will not only deal with the coronavirus and future pandemics, but also cancer, TB, and HIV/AIDS.
South Africa supports vaccine manufacturing in Africa to ensure that we become self-sufficient as a continent, that we shed those colonial chains that have always bound us. We shed them and become self-reliant, and today it's a demonstration of how we are moving forward to being self-reliant as a continent, and we should be proud of what we are achieving. Africa should no longer be the last in line to access vaccines against pandemics. Africa should no longer go cap in hand to the Western world, begging and begging for vaccines that they just want to drip off from their tables.
This partnership is planning to manufacture 1 billion doses of COVID vaccines for Africans within the next 5 years. Developers say what is key for these vaccines is that it will be stable, at room temperature for months. And that allows greater transportation and storage in countries where infrastructure may be limited. Countries like South Africa and India have been pushing for patent waivers to allow for the development of vaccines in low-income countries specifically. But there's been significant resistance from big pharmaceutical companies against the transfer of technology.
South Africa and Africa science were some of the best science done during this COVID pandemic. And then one would ask why? Why is that the case when we have a continent that's much deprived on technology? And the reason for that is quite simple. We have very used it for the past 10, 20, 30 years to deal with epidemics and pandemics. And so we know how to react very quick.
This project will make next generation vaccines using new technology against COVID and cancer, essentially a project aimed at African innovation for Africa. But critics say it may be early days and the challenge of intellectual property and patents still remain.
Hong Kong authorities say they will kill about 2,000 small animals, including hamsters, after several tested positive for COVID-19 at a pet store where an employee was also infected.
Bringing a pet home for a child should be a joyous occasion, but it's turned to heartache for animal lovers caught up in the Hong Kong government's latest anti-COVID crackdown, a hamster cull. Anyone who bought hamsters recently has been ordered to hand them over to the health workers.
I did think of not turning them in. The first thing I did was to get myself tested and to get my whole family tested. But after some consideration, there were so many unknowns, so this was the only thing we could really do.
An increase in COVID-19 infections was traced back to this pet shop, where 11 hamsters tested positive for the virus. Since then, health workers have been visiting other pet shops in the territory to enforce the cull. And the government isn't only targeting animals. Anyone who recently entered the shops will have to go into quarantine for 3 weeks, whether they had direct contact with the hamsters or not. But most scientists say it's extremely rare for the virus to be transmitted from pets to people.
We need to remember that millions of people around the world have been infected by SARS-CoV-2. Millions of people around the world have pets, and there have been no cases proven of pets transmitting infection to other humans.
Dozens of shops have been forced to close and animal importers have been ordered to suspend trade. The government says it doesn't have the capacity to test every hamster in Hong Kong, but the cull will cut transmission chains.
This is an extended edition of the CBC Morning Report. We'll take a break here and we'll come back with more international news. The United States and Russia have dug in their heels over Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's border, with no sign that either will relent from entrenched positions that have raised fears of a Russian invasion and a new war in Europe. In advance of critical talks today between U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the two sides appeared no closer to any compromise that might ease tensions and avert the threat of a Russian invasion.
Russia has amassed an estimated 100,000 troops around the north and east of Ukraine, including areas that put them in easy striking distance of the capital, Kiev. For the last 8 years, Ukraine has been battling around 35,000 Russia-backed rebels who control 2 of its eastern provinces. Russia reportedly has military personnel stationed there, although the Kremlin denies this. Russian troops are also deployed in Crimea, which was annexed from Ukraine in 2014. And there are fears that another battlefront could open up on the border with Belarus, where Russia is moving troops for war games next month. Hod Abdelhamid reports now from Kiev.
Hello, nice to meet you. The message is the same, but this time it's from the Ukrainian capital Kiev that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken renewed calls for Russia to choose diplomacy or pay a price in case of military escalation.
Today, there are some 100,000 Russian soldiers near Ukraine's borders, and in that sense, the threat to Ukraine is unprecedented. So the President asked me to underscore once again our commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity, to its sovereignty, to its independence.
The hastily arranged visit comes as Washington confirms another $200 million in military aid for Kiev, a clear show of support for what the U.S. calls Ukraine's fundamental right to sovereignty. That's angered Moscow. It says that's a threat to its own security. Ukraine and the U.S. hoping this military support may change President Vladimir Putin's calculations, even though more Russian troops are on the move, this time towards Ukraine's northern border. Russia says it's ahead of planned military exercises with Belarus, and the U.S. shouldn't be concerned.
Declaring political support from the side of United States and providing such military supplies can deter Russian aggression. Of course, Russia will emphasize that providing these military weapons is a red line for them, but it is the only way for Ukraine to defend itself now.
Tensions between NATO and Moscow over Ukraine have been growing for months. Putin is demanding that the Americans pledge never to let Ukraine join NATO or expand the military alliance eastwards, a demand the U.S. refuses to accept. Western countries have accused the Kremlin of preparing a pretext for an assault on Ukraine, and the U.S. went further, saying it has intelligence that Russia could carry out a covert operation inside Ukraine to create instability. But if hopes for more negotiations seemed to have reached a dead end last week, now there seems to be again room for a diplomatic solution to this crisis, despite the rhetoric and accusations.
Myself, I find it unlikely that Russia would attack Ukraine in this manner that people expect, with huge land force that would inevitably result in many casualties. I do not think that Russian society and Russian political system could take that psychological blow easily.
Still, Ukraine would like to see decisive action against Russia sooner rather than later, starting with imposing new harsh sanctions that would weaken Russia's economy. From here, Anthony Blinken heads to Berlin, where he will discuss with some of his European counterparts the way forward in preparation of another meeting on Friday with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Now, ask anyone here and they would tell you that that meeting is the most important of the week.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is fighting to save his premiership after a member of his party defected over accusations he and his staff defied lockdown rules. This as an internal Conservative rebellion reportedly gathered pace.
In a highly charged atmosphere, Prime Minister's questions began with another major body blow for Boris Johnson. News one of his MPs, Christian Wakeford, had defected to the opposition party. This following morning, newspaper reports of a widening plot to oust Johnson by members of his own party. Jokes at the Prime Minister's expense followed.
I see the very noise. I'm sure the Chief Whip has told them to bring their own booze.
Salvo after salvo.
Nobody told the Prime Minister he was breaking his own rules. Absolutely pathetic.
If he had any shred of compassion for all those out there who've suffered through this, he'd go.
MPs clamouring for explanations from Johnson about the increasing catalogue of rule-breaking parties that took place under his watch when the country was deep in lockdown. But the Prime Minister seemed energised, fighting tooth and nail for his party and his job.
When the history of this pandemic comes to be written, and the history of the Labour Party comes to be written, and believe me, they are history and will remain history, Mr. Speaker, it will show that we delivered while they dithered, and we vaccinated while they vacillated, Mr. Speaker. I am intensely proud of what this government has done.
And call after call for Johnson to resign was met with the same message: to reserve judgment and wait for the results of the inquiry into a growing list of rule-breaking.
Mr. Speaker, when a Prime Minister is spending his time trying to convince the great British public that he's actually stupid rather than dishonest, isn't it time that he goes now?
Yay! But it's voices from his own party that could do the most damage to his political future. MP David Davis wants the Theresa May government's chief Brexit negotiator delivering this surgical strike.
Like many on these benches, I spent weeks and months defending the Prime Minister against often angry constituents. But I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Despite the full force of brand Boris back on show, and despite the promise that Plan B COVID restrictions will be slashed from next week, this was a bruising day in Parliament for the Prime Minister. It's seemingly impossible for him to escape all the growing anger within his Conservative Party. And with the results of a potentially damaging inquiry just around the corner, Boris Johnson's days in office could soon be numbered.
The British Parliament. The first flights carrying emergency relief supplies for Tonga have landed, and more are on their way after the runway of the Pacific Island nation's main airport was cleared of ash and debris from last weekend's devastating volcanic eruption and tsunami. A ship from the New Zealand Navy carrying 250,000 litres of fresh water and with the ability to produce 70,000 litres of fresh water a day through its desalination plant is expected to arrive tomorrow.
Help is on its way to Tonga. 2 New Zealand Navy ships carrying supplies have begun a 3-day journey, which should see them arrive on Friday. Perhaps the most essential cargo will be fresh water and a desalination plant to make more while the ships are there.
We're heading their way now with a whole lot of water. The ship can currently holds over 250,000 litres of water, and we'll be able to provide that once we arrive. And then every day thereafter, we're going to be producing another 70,000 litres of water.
Satellite images show a thick layer of ash on the runway of Tonga's main airport. On the left is how it looked before the eruption. The ash is delaying deliveries of international aid flights.
Volunteers and workers are cleaning up the runway, and we understand that before the end of this week that may well be completed, and there will be an opportunity for aircraft to land safely, but we won't know the full extent of that outcome until the runway is cleared and a proper assessment can be undertaken.
Communicating with Tonga is difficult. There's no internet and limited phone calls because the tsunami severed the fibre optic cable connecting the country to the rest of the world. The telecoms operator says it'll be at least 4 weeks before the connection is restored. Prime Minister Siyaosi Soveleni released his first official statement, confirming what many feared. The eruption caused an unprecedented disaster, with the volcanic mushroom plume covering all of Tonga's 170 islands. The Red Cross estimates that up to 80,000 Tongans may be affected.
The devastation is widespread, for sure, and it was one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in decades.
The Tongan government has given approval for the New Zealand Navy ships to arrive in its waters, but the aid they're carrying must be delivered contactless. Tonga has had just one case of COVID-19 since the pandemic began, and while it desperately needs help, it doesn't want to risk an outbreak now.
More major international airlines have cancelled flights heading to the United States or changed the planes they're using. That's the latest complication in a dispute over concerns that the 5G mobile phone service could interfere with aircraft technology. Some airlines said they've warned that the Boeing 777, a plane used by carriers worldwide, was particularly affected by the new high-speed wireless service.
There are fears 5G signals could impact radio altimeters, which measure a plane's height in the sky and is crucial during bad weather. Well, in response, AT&T and Verizon said they would pause the rollout near key airports, but for some carriers, that just wasn't enough. Let's speak to Roger Cheng, who's the executive editor of CNET News. That's an online technology and consumer electronics website. He's joining us by Skype from New York. Hi there. Thanks for speaking to us on Al Jazeera. So I am taking a look at your website, and no surprise that this is one of your top stories on the front page of your website. I mean, what do you make of the latest twist and turn now that AT&T and Verizon are saying, well, okay, we're going to delay switching on the 5G mobile network? Where does this go to next?
It's really unclear at this point. There's a lot of open-ended questions. You know, we thought a lot of this had been settled 2 weeks ago. The carriers had come to an agreement with the airlines and with the FAA, delaying their network for 2 weeks to do some further testing. And they thought that had settled any potential objections or future objections. That's obviously not the case, as the airlines are once again objecting to the potential for interference between their networks and some of the equipment on planes. So right now, it's sort of it's in limbo for the carriers. They have turned on the upgraded version of their 5G network elsewhere, but when it comes to areas around the airports, they've basically hit pause, and there really is no telling when they'll be able to resume the rollout, or if they actually end up rolling out their networks in or near those airports.
Let me ask you this, because 5G has been rolled out in other countries. So why is there such concern over it near airports in the U.S.?
There are a lot of questions about that, and frankly, you know, I've talked to AT&T and Verizon. They are throwing their hands up. They're not entirely sure, as you note. 5G, in particular, this flavor of 5G that uses the specific bands of radio airwaves that the airline industry believes is a potential interference issue, that has been in use elsewhere. Now, you know, we've seen from other comments from the airlines, Emirates Airlines, for instance, has noted that the power usage might be higher in the U.S. than it is elsewhere. We're still kind of looking into what or how the deployments are different than they are elsewhere, but you know, the carriers and the FCC, notably the Federal Communications Commission, you know, have said time and time again that the service doesn't pose a risk to airlines. But you know, there's obviously a lot of nerves, and this is high stakes. So I think everyone is kind of taking a pause and trying to get a little bit more data and information on just what this risk actually is.
So is it ultimately down to the question of if it's a fight over who has precedence over the skies, whether it's the airlines or the telecommunications companies at this point?
I wouldn't quite put it that dramatically. I think the question is whether or not I think it's finding a way for both sides to coexist. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be black and white. It's not necessarily the airlines dominate the skies or the telecommunications company. There will be some sort of compromise made. It's just unclear. I think both sides are still trying to figure out what the other wants. I would say airlines ideally would just not have this. I mean, they would prefer to not have this spectrum deployed at all. The carriers, which have spent about $80 billion on this, probably would disagree. So there's probably going to be some sort of compromise down the middle. But at this point, I think everyone's sort of taking a cautious approach.
Microsoft Corporation has agreed to buy Activision Blizzard Incorporated in a $68.7 billion deal, uniting two of the biggest forces in video games to create the world's third biggest gaming company. In its largest purchase ever, Microsoft will pay $95 a share in cash for one of the most legendary gaming publishers, known for titles like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, but which is also grappling with the cultural upheaval over its treatment of women.
The deal to acquire Activision Blizzard could be the biggest in the gaming industry, and it's Microsoft's largest purchase. It's the company's latest move in a bid to strengthen its position in the gaming and virtual reality market. The move will be subject to approval from both US and European regulators. So let's now speak to Brian Cresciente. He's a video game consultant and founder of Kotaku, a video game website and blog. He joins me now from New York. So Microsoft is willing to pay for this more than double the amount it did for LinkedIn about 6 years ago. Why does the company want to make such a big push into gaming?
Well, I think first off, you have to realize that Microsoft is already very invested in gaming with the Xbox console and with PC gaming. And so this is doing something that's essentially strengthening their position. It's if it goes through, it'll probably bump them up to be one of the top 3 game companies in the world.
Does the value of the company and the cost of this acquisition perhaps reflect the surge in popularity in gaming, particularly during the pandemic?
Yeah, gaming has definitely been on the rise over the last year or so, especially with everything going on with the pandemic. More people are playing games. There's been, I think when they announced this news, they mentioned that there are 3 billion gamers out there, and that number is supposed to jump up to 4.5 or more than 4.5 by 2030. So gaming's a huge market. And Activision Blizzard was one of the top 10, or is one of the top 10 game publishers in the world. They have a lot of incredibly popular titles: Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Diablo, and then most perhaps importantly, they have a huge stake in the mobile game market, which is the strongest growing, I think, of all of sort of facets of gaming right now. And that's through King, which is the developer and publisher of Candy Crush.
The deal comes with some controversy, doesn't it, after allegations of sexual misconduct at Activision Blizzard, and actually what the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing described as a culture of constant sexual harassment. So how will Microsoft approach this?
Well, it's interesting because this is something that's been going on for a little bit. On top of that, a lot of the employees at Activision Blizzard are in the midst of trying to unionize. So these are two things that obviously Microsoft is going to have to contend with and figure out how they want to address if the deal goes through. But I don't think this deal would have even been on the table if this hadn't happened. The company was valued at actually more than what this purchase price would be about a year ago. But I suspect a lot of what's been going on has been sort of eating away at their valuation. So on some level, it sort of set up the ability for this purchase to go through. But again, it does come with all of these issues, including, I think, a big one, which is Bobby Kotick, who was or is the CEO of Activision Blizzard. There's a strong push by employees and by even some people who play games to have him ousted. Microsoft hasn't really confirmed on the record that would happen. I know he's going to be running the company through the deal going through. After that, the Wall Street Journal is reporting via some of their sources that he will actually be leaving the company.
Thank you for staying with us in this extended edition of the CBC Morning Report. We'll take a break here, but when we come back, a look at sports. In sports now, India's under-19s crushed Ireland's under-19s by 174 runs in their ICC World Cup match at the Brian Lara Stadium in Trinidad yesterday, to be the first team to qualify for the playoffs. Sent into bat, the young Indians scored 307 for 5 off their 50 overs. Harnoor Singh top scored with 88. Muzamil Sharad stuck 3 for 79. Well, in their reply, the Irish were all out for 133 in 39 overs. That's a look at sports. We'll get ready to bring to you some of the latest in weather in just a moment. But meanwhile, the Windies under-19s only have to beat Sri Lanka's under-19s tomorrow to advance to the playoffs. That's because although Australia defeated Scotland yesterday, the Aussies' net run rate is below the Windies. Playing at Warner Park in St Kitts, Scotland under-19s made 236 for 8, and the young Aussies replied with 240 for 3 in 39.5 overs to win by 5 wickets. All of Australia's Group D games are done, and they're on 4 points with a net run rate of 0.96, while the Windies are at 1.009 with their last game to play. West Indies defeated a BCA Presidents 11 by 7 wickets in a T20 day-night practice match at Kensington Oval. Chasing a revised target of 160 after the Presidents 11 scored 131 for 6, all 5 of the Windies batsmen who went into the crease passed 20. They reached the target of 165 with 3 wickets down after 18.3 overs and then batted on until a 4th wicket fell off 19.2 overs. Brandon King and Kyle Mears set the stage by blasting 62 off only 4.5 overs for the first wicket before King fell for 32 off just 13 balls, including 4 fours and 2 sixes. Mears hit the top score of 38 off 32 with 2 fours and 2 sixes. Let's take a look at our forecast conditions now here as recorded at the Met Office at the Grantley Adams International Airport. I believe we shall continue with our sports news. Behavior by athletes that violate the Olympic spirit or Chinese rules could be subject to punishment. A Beijing 2022 official made the comment after rights groups voiced concern about the safety of competitors if they protest at next month's Winter Olympics.
Sanctions could include having their accreditation cancelled. The Games have been hit by diplomatic boycotts from several countries, including the US, Britain and Australia, over the treatment of Muslim Uyghurs, although China denies allegations of human rights abuses. Podium protests are already banned under Olympic rules, but many feel that is wrong.
All athletes have a right. Many athletes feel they have a responsibility, and they have every right to be speaking out whenever it is that they're competing. Why? Is because the world faces so many global challenges right now that no industry is immune.
There should be blanket protection for any athletes that speak up at any time about issues of human rights. That's why athletes continue to use the podium, even though the IOC promises to punish them for doing so. It's because that's when people are paying attention. That's when they can get the message across, and they understand that these issues are bigger than sport and bigger than them.
Well, that's it for today's extended edition of the CBC Morning Report. We thank you for staying with us. We do look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. I'm Pearson Bowen. Good morning.